Welcome everyone, it's the Crypto Lark and I'm joined today by Naomi Brockwell. How's it going?
It's going pretty well over here. I'm on the West Coast at the moment, which has been nice and warm and better than New York usually is. So there you go.
There you go. There you go. West Coast's a nice place, you know.
It's
San
not bad.
yeah, San Fran's got its, love and hate moments for me, but in general, California's really nice.
For sure. No, it's been good. We're right in the heart of Silicon Valley at the moment. So different scene to what I'm used to, which is like the very tech unfriendly New York at the moment.
I feel like the New York scene, because I talked to a lot of people from both places, right? But I feel like the New York scene's like the money scene. Like, yeah, where's the money? Like, where's the money in
Yeah.
crypto? Whereas like in Silicon Valley, like, yeah, we'll take the money too, but like, let's make some cool tech stuff. I mean, there's so
No,
many
it's
tech
it's
companies
pretty
there.
cool. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of the scene here. So it's nice just exploring the area and getting to know it. And I'm going to be based here like half the time now, so it'll be pretty fun.
Yeah, very, very cool. Okay, well, let's just jump into it because we got so much to talk about, and there's been so much happening in the news recently. And one of the things that we've been seeing a real trend towards is more and more kind of institutional players starting to get into crypto. I mean, we had E-Trade, who was rumored to be doing something. We had Ameritrade last week, who was kind of caught with, experimenting with paper trading for Bitcoin, Litecoin, and all this stuff. And we have Backed, and then we have Fidelity, and on and on and on and on it goes. Futures contracts. I mean, there was a day when the CME did more in volume in futures contracts than the biggest spot price exchange, which was Binance, did on the day by about $100 million. So my question to
Wow.
you is, do you think that Bitcoin is very quickly becoming too institutionalized?
I think that's a great question. I think you have to, I mean, what does institutionalized mean? Does that create barriers to other usage? There are a lot of things that come along with something becoming more institutionalized. And I think that a lot of people had their eyes on traditional finance. Some people were thinking, oh, this is going to be great because this will bring more liquidity in. This will bring a lot of money. This is going to be what makes it go to the moon. And that was kind of half the people. And then the other half was saying, like, this has nothing to do with traditional finance. This was created to get away from traditional finance. We don't want what happened there to happen in crypto. Let's try and stay away from this. And there are pros and cons to traditional finance getting involved. Like, for example, you think about how America, for example, which is like a major world player, probably I would say the most important and the most powerful player, because like the SEC's arm is super long. It goes across all kinds of borders, and you're never really protected if you're dealing with US customers, or if they think you might be dealing with US customers and they subpoena you to find out. And so what's happening in America is lobbyists really rule everything, right? And they have a lot of control over what happens in terms of regulation. And so if you have people who are crypto friendly fighting on crypto's behalf, that could possibly be a good thing, because politicians don't really like crypto. There's no reason for them to. Either the banks, it's a threat to them, or they're involved with it. If they're involved, they're more likely to try to, find things that are crypto friendly. But then you have the regulatory capture side of things, where the big financial institutions try to implement rules that create barriers to entry for the smaller companies. That's what I'm most afraid of. I'm most afraid of the regulatory capture that happens when you have something like Fidelity coming in, or JP Morgan
Mm-hmm.
coming in and saying, hey, government, we need these rules. We need, to institute third-party rules where, normal people can't have custody of their assets. You need these third parties like us to hold it, to protect people, because we're licensed, we're regulated, that big R word, that magic word, regulated, and that means we
We have to
protect
protect
everyone.
unsophisticated investors.
Exactly. And so that's what I'm most worried about. And I think that's a huge threat to crypto, actually. And I don't see it as a plus at all. So although there may be some good things on the periphery, if there are players trying to make the world a more crypto-friendly place, that could be good, but I'm not sure that it's going to be to the advantage of all the players. I think it's just going to be to the big institutions who can afford the compliance costs, who can, afford to hire 1 trillion lawyers to navigate this crazy complex regulatory environment. So, at the end of the day, I think that crypto is created in such a way that it can circumvent a lot of this stuff. So crypto will always be useful in that way. You know, it can't be censored, it can't be controlled, but the government can do a real good job at trying. So, so we'll always have the option, but I do worry that we're looking at the world kind of evolving where it's just going to be really gummed up, and it's not going to be this mainstream freedom tool that we probably want it to be. I think that people like fringe cases will use that. They'll probably use privacy coins and things for that, or you know, privacy second layer functions on top of Bitcoin, things like that. And that's really where we're at. We're going to have this very institutionalized sector using cryptocurrency, and that's obviously the future. Obviously, money and security, everything is going to become digital, and they're going to be using blockchain tech to do it. But then I think that there is definitely a space for continued fringe use, but that may be all people use it for. You know, that may be the only demographic that uses it. You know, people who are concerned about freedom, who are concerned about freedom of speech, who have financial autonomy, financial privacy. Unfortunately, that's not a large amount of the population across the world.
No, it really isn't. A lot of people don't care about that. I mean, look at how many people willingly give away everything on Facebook, and you realize people aren't that concerned about privacy.
And we're talking about Facebook, but let's talk about the people who willingly give away all of their data by using credit cards for everything. Who don't use cash purchases. I mean, the banks, that's where they make a huge amount of their money, by selling your data and saying, well, we know exactly where she buys everything. Naomi goes to, you know, this cafe every morning and buys avocado toast. Like, you know,
they're slaying us, aren't they? These banks. I mean, just think about it. Not only are they selling our data and selling all this information about us, but they're also charging crazy amounts of interest on the credit cards and the mortgages, and then, you know, they steal everything from you and commit all this and that's not enough. They have to then go and commit a whole giant pile of crime on top of that, you know.
Absolutely.
Doing, you know, money laundering for Al Qaeda and stuff like this, and wow, the crazy stuff.
The Fed, like, just coming into cahoots with them as well, that are creating all this stuff on top of it. So the Fed's setting interest rates so low, so there's not even a perk of really keeping your money in a bank account, because it's not like you're earning interest on it anymore, because the interest rates are just set so low. So, you know, like I just don't see the benefit of going through that system. At the moment, like when you're talking about online purchases, yeah, it made sense to use a credit card. But now if you have cryptocurrency, that may be a better option for people, so your data isn't tracked.
Yeah. When I can, I do, without a doubt. And, you know, unfortunately, not enough places accept it yet, but it's important to support the people who do. I really believe in that. If you have a local business or even an online business that you're friendly with or you use on a semi-regular basis, whatever it might be, pay in crypto if you can. I know for a lot of people that's a hard thing because the pizza problem and all this stuff. Like, guys, you can't be afraid to, you know, spend a couple bucks once in a while. I want to come back a little bit to this institutional idea, and I actually was thinking while you were talking, it's almost a bit of a Trojan horse inviting all these institutions in. This is something I've always thought about Wall Street in general, is that they are not our friends.
No.
Nothing they do is friendly towards anyone who is not them, and even then they hate each other and always are trying to, you know, cloak and dagger each other all the time.
Right.
And I think you brought up a really good point about, you know, whether it's maybe Fidelity or someone else, but them actually kind of starting to push towards this regulatory conformity. Well, Bitcoin's only for sophisticated, accredited investors. And so all exchanges now have to enforce this accredited investor thing. And that would cut out players like Coinbase, which have spent a lot of time and energy bringing crypto to the masses. Whereas Fidelity, they're all about their big clients, right? And you look at the other guys, Back's not going to be for regular people. Now, look, Ameritrade and E-Trade, they are for a wider audience. So seeing those guys get in, I'm less worried about, because I look at those more as kind of just marketplaces. And it's just another form of an exchange in the same way we saw like Robinhood come in. You can trade stocks, or you can trade Bitcoin and Ethereum or Litecoin, whatever it's going to be. But you do have to take these big players with a big grain of salt, because they're not our friends.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to think of them the same way that you think about a lot of these government players coming in. Like, they're not our friends. You know, you have vested interests that are protecting their position right now. This is not people coming in to save the day and bringing in more liquidity and, you know, helping us go to the moon. You know, there may be some on the periphery, as I mentioned, some positive externalities of this happening, but I would bet that the negative externalities are going to far outweigh those. So I think we should be very careful. And luckily, there are just some really smart people in the space who are constantly improving on the tech and creating more tools to give people financial autonomy and privacy. And as long as you said, we're supporting the people who are doing this and creating market signals saying, yes, we do want these things, you know, I think that that's really great. And I know we're going to be talking later on about Binance launching their DEX. I think things like that are really exciting, having more decentralized exchanges where people do have more of that freedom. I think that's a very exciting direction to be going in. And as long as people constantly innovating in that way, then we'll probably stay a few steps ahead, but it'll only ever be a few.
That's right, and it's a constant game.
Catch up. Yeah, it's not like we can just rest on our laurels and say, yes, we achieved the freedom. We are done. Yeah, it's not really how it works.
Now, I remember reading something from Fluffy Pony one time, and he said that basically, and this could apply to the same thing we were just saying, is that privacy is a never-ending game. You're only ever able to stay a couple of steps ahead because the other guys are always working to get ahead of you. And it was kind of a paraphrase, but that's the general idea, and it's so true. Now, we mentioned regulations. I think this is a good moment to sort of move into that, and we'll end up talking about Tether a bit maybe on the back end of this too. But the regulations we're seeing right now, it's one of these, again, I feel as much of what we just said with that institutional conversation really comes into the regulation conversation, is that are regulations a good thing or a bad thing? We see India right now, for example, there's some rumors which I would suspect are likely to be true rumors, considering how in the past the key financial organizations in India have been very anti-crypto, particularly the decentralized ones, right? There's been talk of the digital rupee, which of course would be a centralized coin that they control the emission of and accounts of and all that fun stuff, right? But that's almost not interesting to me at all versus something like Bitcoin, which they can't control, and thus is a threat to their power as institutions. So we see India discussing a potential ban, which would be dramatic on the same level that it was dramatic for China. Maybe not quite as dramatic because the Indian market is not quite as big, but still it would be bad when it comes down. And then we see other countries like Finland, who just passed some new regulations, and their regulations were kind of the same as what France did. And they basically said that, hey, we really want crypto businesses to come here. You want to launch your ICO in France? Awesome. We're going to give you a special visa for your crypto company. Or you want to have an exchange here in France? Great. All you have to do is register with us, and we're going to ensure that you have access to the banking infrastructure as part of that deal. So, I mean, that feels like really positive regulation. So what are your thoughts on this? I mean, obviously, regulation and compliance are these kind of dirty words in my mind, but at the same time, like, that kind of regulation doesn't seem bad.
Well, I mean, when you say, like, well, that's positive regulation, it's like, yeah, because they're giving you the permission to do the things that you should already be able to do. Like, it's amazing how happy we get when it's like, oh my God, the government did a reasonable thing. This is fantastic. What great regulation. And it's like,
just so rare.
Well, it's amazing how we've just normalized this situation where nothing is allowed unless we've been given explicit permission. The idea that when Jay Clayton was saying, well, how do we know what's a security and what's not? You guys won't give us clear guidance. And his response was, you should just presume that everything is a security if you're not sure. And it's like, well, of course, every government body wants to think like that. They all want to say, just presume that you're in our jurisdiction if you're unsure. It's just kind of this crazy situation we're in. But as you said, I mean, there are definitely places around the world that are more crypto friendly, and they're recognizing that if they open their doors, then this is a giant industry that really it's burgeoning at the moment. We're just seeing it start to blossom and starting to see the potential of this industry, the incredible number of jobs that have been created, the incredible amount of wealth that's been created. It's quite incredible. So I really like the idea of different countries recognizing that and not self-sabotaging, which I see places like New York doing, where they institute the bit license, everyone leaves because it's just not good for crypto businesses. It's terrible. How many have they issued now? Like 18 bit licenses over 5-6 years. Like it's incredible how few businesses are in New York. Whereas on the other side of things, you've got Bermuda and Malta and Gibraltar, and you said that Finland's looking at some interesting things, and France is doing some interesting things. I mean, I think that America really, if they're worried about losing their stronghold in the global economy as being like, numero uno, then I think that they're going about it the wrong way. They're going about it by saying, well, we're going to stop it and kill it because crypto might kill us, and so let's just stop it in its tracks, instead of saying this is this inevitable thing everyone's going to be going on, and unless we open the doors, other people are going to open the doors. So they're really just letting other people come in and take that mantle right now.
And it's interesting too, of course, because the United States is this big regulatory mess where you have one guy who's trying to say what everyone should do, and then you have 50 different guys where the states in that
Right.
situation all say, no, we're going to do something kind of different sometimes. And so
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
seen that happen in the U.S., where New York has been quite draconian in its approach, and then we have like Wyoming, which is saying like, kick the doors wide open, let's get all the crypto businesses in here. We're going to do everything we can to invite those businesses in, and there's some others that are kind of following suit. I know Colorado either has passed or is in the process of looking at some very crypto kind of friendly regulations. So those are positive things. I guess we'll see what comes out of that, but I definitely agree with that. Unless the U.S. kind of really, makes some effort to continue to be that leader, technology wise, we are going to see these businesses simply go to France and stay in France, go to Malta and stay in Malta, go to Russia and stay in Russia.
Absolutely.
Russia's doing a lot in terms of regulation as well. And they, of course, in terms of Eastern Europe, they have a massive developer scene over there that will be inviting in these projects. And especially if they can get, again, regulatory approval. And it's so funny. It's like you say, it's why do we have to ask permission for these things? But the reality is that, and it's a sucky reality, but the reality is that so long as we continue to go out and vote for governments and pay our tax money and all this stuff, those people are going to be there, and they're going to want respect my authority kind of stuff, right?
Exactly.
And it's
Exactly.
better for them to come in and say, we're really welcoming of this, we really want this to happen, we want to encourage this in whatever way we can as a government, versus like cracking down on it, especially not in the way that we're seeing being proposed in India, and especially not the way that we've seen in China, which is is crazy. And of course, the funny thing about China is that they weren't able to stop it. That this thriving black market now exists in China, where Chinese Bitcoiners are paying a premium so they can get their Bitcoin, which is kind of crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's what's exciting about cryptocurrency. That's what people have been saying from the beginning, because it's not a matter of saying, oh, will the government allow this? Will they not allow this? This is something that exists regardless of what governments say. And I think that is the primary power of cryptocurrency, of Bitcoin. We haven't had that before. Before, we've had so many different types of competing currencies in existence. We've had all kinds of digital currencies. We've had things that can do the things that Bitcoin can do, and they're great, and they've just been shut down. They just haven't worked, or they haven't gotten the network effect to be able to keep going, because people are like, well, the government's going to shut this down. I don't want to buy into something that they're just going to make illegal. Suddenly we have something that can't be shut down. And I think that that's the primary power of this. And I mean, this may only ever just apply to a fringe sector of society who are interested in that stuff, but that's still substantial. We saw that Bitcoin works as a currency when it was basically just being used on Silk Road. It worked. People recognized that this had value. They recognized that if they accepted this currency, they could then sell it later because there was enough market demand for it. That's all you need for this to be functional and to be useful for people. And we've already proven that, over and over again. So it doesn't matter to me what governments say at the end of the day. If China says, oh, we ban this, if India says, oh, we ban this, because first of all, I mean, there are competing jurisdictions all over the world. So as long as it's allowed in one country in the world, then this is going to be fine. And even if it's not allowed in any country, let's say they all band together, and I know this is something that Japan is looking at the moment, they all band together and say, let's create this global decision that we'll all get on the same page and we'll treat cryptocurrency exactly the same way, so there are no loopholes. Let's say by some crazy miracle that happens and Russia decides to agree with America and China, and all the countries are just like, oh, we are all on the same page. Cuba's like, I agree with you in the United States. By some miracle that happens, it doesn't need government permission in order to operate. There are so many ways that this can continue to operate. Like, governments can slow it down. They can, put probes on IP addresses and monitor usage and track things down. But there are so many different ways that people are coming up with alternative internet systems and all of these different ways that this could still continue to thrive. So we have not seen, we've only just seen the beginning of cryptocurrency and what power this could give to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And governments aren't going to be able to stop it. And that's kind of the funny thing, is that you brought up a good point. We are having, we're reimagining the way the internet works, which is a fundamental shift in everything that we've understood about the internet up until this point. And if you go back to when the internet was started, and the people who started the internet, they never wanted it to end up like this necessarily, with all these walled gardens stealing all your data. It's big government's biggest gift ever, the current internet.
Oh my gosh, government couldn't get away with it by passing these things, and so they just go through this private company as well, like, of my own volition, please have all of this information about myself, and the government says thank you. So I mean, we've really done this to ourselves and haven't quite realized the effect that this is going to have in terms of monitoring people, tracking them, curtailing their decisions, and all of that. I think it's something really important that people need to be more cognizant of.
And if you look at these giant private companies, I mean, yes, they're private companies, but the level of interoperability, of closeness between these private companies and government organizations is scary on a lot of levels. I think it's is Facebook on the Atlantic Council, which is like funded by the CIA and the Gulf monarchies and stuff like this. And it's some scary stuff when you start to see how embedded with each other they are.
Absolutely. It's I mean, I look down on places like Australia that have really destroyed encryption and said, hey, we have the right to access all your devices and to force you and to put backdoors and things and fine you hundreds of millions of dollars if you don't comply, companies. And that for me is crazy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, we can't be so angry at that happening. Like, I mean, they're very open about it, but then you have the American government that's doing all the same things, but they're just doing it in a more closed-off way. In part, I kind of prefer the closed-off way because at least there's some semblance, like we haven't normalized the idea of government just stealing all of our data. There's still kind of a little bit of pushback. Like they have to hide it because the culture hasn't accepted it yet. I prefer that system to what's happening in Australia where people are like, oh, encryption. I think I heard something about that. Don't really mind. I did not see the pushback.
I trust the government.
I trust the government. They've got my best interests at heart. And, that to me is really sad. And I wish it wasn't like that. And I wonder if people will wake up too late realizing, what they've done. So as long as there's somewhere in the world that still respects these freedoms and can push back against the bullying. I mean, we've seen Ecuador crumble before. There was sort of this bastion of we're not going to be bullied by the American government. We're going to stand up. And Julian Assange could seek refuge in the middle of Britain, in the middle of London. He could seek refuge. And that was amazing. Then you have this new regime that's like, oh, we don't mind being bullied by the US. Also, thank you, IMF, for that $1 billion loan that you've just given us in exchange for Julian Assange.
That didn't influence our decision at all.
Not at all. So there is, it's a sad state of affairs when you don't have people standing up for what's right. But then again, America is incredibly powerful, and it makes sense that people are buckling under the pressure because it's scary. It's scary.
Absolutely. And I saw something recently, and it's interesting about the ability of cryptocurrencies to actually provide an international level playing field for actors, because I saw recently that the United States is revoking sanction waivers to South Korea, Turkey, Japan, China, and India. Now, China and India don't really care because they're big enough economies. They don't necessarily, especially China, isn't going to be bullied like that by the U.S. But we have to keep it real that South Korea, Turkey, and Japan are much more susceptible to those levers of power. And basically, the U.S. is telling Japan that it's no longer allowed to buy oil from Iran, or that it'll be facing sanctions itself from the U.S. I mean, that's a broken international financial system when you have these countries doing this. And look, I mean, people can fall on all sides of the coin here in terms of the political situation, and there's been a lot of misinformation about that. But my baseline on all these things always comes back to what's providing the most freedom, right? And that's actually decentralization. And all the trouble that decentralization can bring with it. People are going to do bad things, but people are going to do mostly good things.
Absolutely.
When we give them the freedom to do this. And every time we let governments do these kind of things, we're saying, just take away a little bit more of my freedom. A little more of my freedom every single time.
There's this false idea that, you create a law and the bad guys are going to follow it. No, it's the good guys that are getting hurt. It's their prosperity that's being curtailed. It's their innovation that's being hampered. The bad guys are going to go, it's a law. What do I care about laws? I'm a bad guy. I don't listen to laws.
Right.
They're going to find a way around it. So, I mean, you're going to have bad things happening regardless of whether there's regulation or not. And I think that regulation for most people is just this crutch. It's this thing that makes them feel good. Oh, we tried. At least we did something. And they're not looking at the actual outcomes of what these policies do. There are lots of unintended consequences, and it really hurts people, but they're unseen consequences, and that's what hurts the most. They're dispersed costs, and whereas the good things about this are really concentrated, you can see the benefits. That's like, oh, we're going to stop the terrorists. That's in name, that sounds great. So when you put that to the floor of Congress and you say, we're going to stop the terrorists, that sounds great. You give that to the media and you say, we're going to stop the terrorists. Oh, everyone cheers. Yes, we're going to do something. You look at the outcomes of these things and whether they actually do what they plan, and then all of the people that are being hurt, you don't hear from them. It's all dispersed costs. It's all people just incrementally losing their freedoms. So it's this huge imbalance in what's happening, and it's just creeping towards ever more totalitarian regimes. That's the direction we're going in.
1984 is not an instruction manual.
Oh my gosh!
Actually,
yeah.
the Snowden leaks actually really proved that they had all this incredibly advanced spy stuff, which that was years ago now. So I can only imagine how much more advanced it is now. But back when that was happening, the official statement was, well, we're doing this to protect against terrorism, all this stuff. But Snowden revealed that what were they actually doing? They were actually spying on activists who were doing things like trying to protect the environment. They were actually, doing corporate espionage for American companies, trying to, get better deals when they're dealing with foreign governments and stuff like this. They're spying on their girlfriends and stuff like this. This is what was happening. This is what mostly that technology is being used for. They were not like terrorists. Who cares about terrorists? We're here to make money. And that's crazy. Now, all that, I think, is a good, segue into Tether. So,
Tether.
Yeah.
It's interesting what's been happening there, right? I think that Caitlin Long really summed it up the best. I really enjoyed her kind of tweet storm, where let me just pull that up, because she said she's stunned but not surprised by the Bitfinex Tether news out of New York. So basically the news, for anyone who doesn't know, is that they apparently used reserves to mask $850 million loss of client funds from 2018, and this is what the New York Attorney General has said, and then they are getting a court order to force Bitfinex to cease this cover-up. Now, on the outside, we've been hearing about Tether for forever, and everyone's been like, oh, Tether's terrible, and Circle's better because it's like Tether, but it's, regulated, and it's out in the open, and it's transparent, and there's an element of truth to that because they have been getting audits, and they had it's clearer what's going on. And the thing that I think is most shocking for people is that Tether has always maintained that it's backed dollar for dollar. Whatever Tether exists, you've got US dollars sitting in a vault somewhere that's going to back that up. Now, if we actually think about the realisticness, is that, did I just make up a word?
We'll take it.
Whether or not it is realistic that people are just going to have all this money sitting in a vault and not being used, what a huge waste of money, because you're losing 2% a year in inflation alone. So obviously that money is always used in traditional finance. It's used to loan out to other people. So then Tether released a statement not too long ago, about a month ago now, that they changed their terms of service, and that kind of came out of nowhere. And it said, oh, we're no longer backed dollar for dollar in a vault. We're also backed by debt instruments. We've loaned out money sometimes, but on the amount due, we can back it, dollar for dollar and all of these things. So that changed, and everyone was like, oh, this is bad and they're terrible, but they're really just doing what everyone else in finance is doing, right? And now you have this that's happened, and everyone went crazy. Now, I'm of two minds, because I'm not sure I ever believed that Tether was 1-to-1 in a vault sitting there, because it seems incredibly unrealistic. That doesn't mean that Tether didn't work. I think Tether is a really useful tool. It's still by far the largest stable coin out there, which means that the market is also agreeing and saying, well, we think that this is a good product. The fact that when this news drops, the price didn't really fluctuate too much, that's still sitting around $1. That is, again, a market signal that most people are saying, well, we don't really mind. I think the issue was that the narrative changed, and it went from being like, oh, absolutely, 1-to-1, this is all clear and transparent and great, to, oh, actually, these are debt instruments, to the Attorney General coming out and saying, well, this is a huge cover-up. But what I liked about Caitlin Long's big Twitter storm is she really points out the double standards of the Attorney General here, because they're using the Mann Act, which, let me pull that up. So it's this big anti-fraud law in New York, and it basically grants the Attorney General lots of powers to go after people if they think that there's money laundering going on and all of this. So what's happened is they're now releasing a statement about Bitfinex and Tether, and they're saying this is this terrible thing, you got to cease this cover up. Meanwhile, Merrill Lynch did something very similar, and they covered it up. They tried to they didn't want to create a bank run on these organizations. It's almost like they're trying to incite one with this cryptocurrency firm that's doing the exact same thing. Like Eric Voorhees said the same thing, where he said, if this is true, that what the Attorney General says, that Bitfinex hit a loss of 850 million and they're like commingling funds and all of this to cover it up, it would just make Bitfinex like every other bank in New York, i.e. running fractional reserve banking. That is like, I like the fact that the crypto community understands fractional reserve enough to not like it, and they're railing against this. But I also don't like the double standards of the Attorney General coming out and saying this is this terrible thing that happened. Meanwhile, every other financial institution is doing the same thing. So it's like, it's this really interesting situation where it seems to me like they're clearly just going after cryptocurrency. And with the same way that they make the TARP bailouts in 09 like really opaque, they forced banks like BB&T that wasn't in debt at all to accept money because they couldn't discriminate as to which banks were accepting it, because that would create a bank run. That would show that your Countrywide is insolvent. That would show that Bear Stearns is insolvent, like JP Morgan is insolvent. They didn't want to give that information to the public and incite that bank run. So they kept it all quiet and they forced people to take money. And now you have this situation where they're literally calling out a specific institution and say, you can't have this cover up, and we're calling you out, and there's this court order. It's just this very interesting hypocrisy that we've got right now. And I think anyone who doesn't understand crypto, I totally agree with the crypto people. Like I don't like fractional reserve. I don't really want to trust my money in an exchange if I know they're doing fractional reserve. I think we can presume that all institutions are, like, unless there's a huge perk for me, like they're paying me a huge amount of interest in order to store my funds there, and that makes up the risk, that it's not something that I want to consider, right? But it's really not good for people not in crypto who don't understand how all this works to suddenly hear, oh, they're covering up hundreds of millions of dollars in loss, and they don't realize that the exact same thing goes on with Chase Morgan, that the exact same thing is going on in all these other institutions.
It's actually really crazy because the double standards are crazy, but I feel like it's just become so normal with government and regulators, and it's happening internationally, it's happening domestically. It's just the hypocrisy and double standards know no end almost. I look at it constantly, and I just look at like the international sanctions regime, for example. It's built on double standards and hypocrisy. The entire thing, you can sanction Iran, well, looking the other way, Saudi Arabia commits a genocide in Yemen and continuing to sell them weapons, right? That's massive double standards, and we see that play out at every single level of government, and from the big to the small. And here we are exactly with Tether. The double standards they stink, absolutely. But the thing I look back to on Tether, and I've never been a massive Tether fan, just because I feel like they've always been just super shady in everything that they do, and it goes against, in a way, kind of what we're trying to achieve with blockchain technology, about actually some kind of transparency, in some, at least in some sort of situations. And the worst, they're practicing fractional reserve making, which means that we've got this giant institutional player essentially within the crypto markets, for the whatever degree they can be considered an institutional player in crypto, and they're doing what everyone else is doing, but they're lying about it. They're saying we're not doing fractional reserve banking, but they're actually doing fractional reserve banking, and they're doing things like covering up that they did some tricky accounting work and gave a bunch of shares up as collateral for the $850 million and all that stuff. And the thing is, it's nothing that no one else does. And that's absolutely true. All the big banks are doing it. It's disgusting when they do it too. We want to demand better from our crypto companies, and Tether's kind of no better than the big banks in this situation. And we've seen the level of shady stuff that they do. The fact that I really liked the Paradise Papers leak. I don't know if you kind of saw this, but basically
No.
the executive team at Tether was a secret before the Paradise Papers leak. They didn't advertise who the executive team was. The Paradise Papers leak came out, and it turned out that the entire executive team of Tether is the exact same executive team as Bitfinex,
Right.
which is just like, why were you guys hiding it? Why do you have to be so damn shady all the time? Can't you just be at least a little bit transparent with us, and you wouldn't have this problem of like no one trusts Tether. Well, it's because you guys are always so damn shady. Just stop it, stop it. But
Yeah.
that just kind of goes back to the whole thing of because they keep doing all this shady stuff, which again is nothing that the big banks don't do. They're so shady, it's ridiculous, and they operate in such an opaque and gray zone all the time, and they love it there because they can manipulate that area versus a place of black and white where it's you have to do follow the rules or not follow the rules. Like, well, rules are kind of whatever we bribe politicians to make them to be, and that's not good. But I can also agree that this run towards more regulated crypto stable coins, it's a positive and a negative thing, because again, it's like we were talking about again with the whole regulation scene is, yeah, okay, there's that. And you have to wonder too is, let's keep it real. Circle, backed by Goldman Sachs, right? They're running USDC. Gemini, we know the Winklevoss twins are all about compliance, right? The game in Wall Street is, stab each other in the back kind of stuff. It's a tough business there, right? To see that these actors might be calling up the Attorney General and saying, hey,
Yeah.
did you see what these other guys are doing? And that, of course, is a positive for USDC and for GUSD and the others. I like DAI personally because it's
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm not convinced that it will work, but it's been a very interesting experiment. And definitely, if they can figure that sort of thing out, having some sort of autonomous institution, for me, I think crypto is too volatile for that sort of a system to work. The amount of collateral now, they're talking about like hiking fees again. Like it's just
up like 15% or something already, which is ridiculous.
To balance that with like the volatility, it's but it's very interesting, and I really am hopeful about that. But like what you're saying about Gemini, for example, you walk around New York and every second bus stop and every second taxi has a sign saying, Gemini, the regulated exchange, things like that. Oh, because crypto should be regulated, all this stuff, like that's their rhetoric. And I don't look at that and feel pleased and feel like, oh, thank goodness, now something like Tether won't happen. And like now you read Reddit comments where when this came out and people were saying like, see, this is why crypto can't be unregulated because things like this happen, all of this stuff. And it's like, really? I don't see the future of cryptocurrency of being like the Winklevoss twins with Gemini saying like everything, we're completely in bed with government. Don't you worry about us. Like that doesn't seem like a perk to me. So it's it's an interesting situation. You have like three types of players, right? You have the Gemini types, which are like, we are completely above board. We are completely regulated. We got all of the right forms, and the compliance costs are crazy and through the roof, and so that's going to be represented in the fees and the freedoms that we do or don't allow you, and that's kind of one class. And then you've got this class over the other side that is like, oh, we're completely about crypto, but we need to be self-accountable. We have self-responsibility. We're about transparency. We're going to create a system that's above board. And, we understand that the incentives of people are generally to try and screw people. So we're going to create tech that helps avoid that so we can create the most robust system possible. Then you have people in the middle who kind of ride on this ethos, but they're kind of doing shady things and you're not really sure where they are. And so it's like there are definitely different types of crypto. And I'm not a huge fan of the regulated one at all. That's probably my least favorite. At least when you have dodgy things in the marketplace, you can call them out and you can say, this is a bad thing. Reputation system hopefully will kick in and people won't use it, right? If they're doing things that are actually bad, you can spread information about it and stop doing it. Whereas regulated things, you have people doing dodgy things all the time, and people use the word regulated as the stamp of approval, as if that means that they're not doing anything dodgy. No, it probably just means that some politician's taking a cut of it. So it's like this false sense of security associated with these things. So that's my least favorite side of things. I would rather have dodgy things that get uncovered and you can tell the market about it and then their product fails. And obviously my most favorite is people who are trying to create systems that are robust. And if we can focus on that more, then that's really the future of crypto. crypto.
Absolutely. And you look at all the regulation that the banks have, and it hasn't stopped them from committing hundreds of billions of dollars in crime that they've been caught for.
Yeah,
That's
like
just
Bernie
what they've been
Madoff.
caught for.
Bernie Madoff was completely regulated.
Yeah.
Yeah, that lot of good that did with protecting people, you know, like Enron is completely regulated environment. Like
Hmm.
that didn't protect people either. So it's this completely false sense of security where people are like, oh, well, we need to protect consumers and that's why, you know, government. And it just doesn't work like that. You've got to realize that there are very self-interested people putting these laws forward. That's just how it all works. So again, they're not your friends.
That's right. That's right. Well, final topic for today is Binance. Binance, obviously, they've launched their, their decentralized exchange, and they've become this industry titan, and it's happened so quickly. So, what are your kind of thoughts on Binance? Do you think that it's good to have so much power in the hands of one exchange player? What are your thoughts about them in general?
Well, I think I don't like when people talk about these monopolies and how they need to be broken up and they have too much power. And I think as long as there is no government enforced monopoly, then there's no barrier to entry and people can compete. You know, Binance is where it is because it's it provides a great service. And there are other exchanges if you prefer different things. If you want to have more accountability, if you want lower fees, there are different choices in the marketplace. And I really don't mind that Binance has a huge amount of market share. I think that's totally fine. And I think what's interesting to me about Binance is I'm not saying that they're the greatest, oh, hail Binance. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with them, because it is an interesting situation. But from what I can see, they're making moves towards becoming this kind of decentralized entity. Right? Like the fact that they're doing a lot of jurisdictional arbitrage, they're moving different sectors all over the world, depending on different laws. So they're partly based here and partly based there. And that is a way of them kind of mitigating the leverage that government can put on the institution. If you're just based in China and China decides, actually, we're going to nationalize this. Well, they can't if part of it's actually based in Malta and part of it's actually based elsewhere. You know, there's less power that government has to exert pressure. So I like that they've kind of safeguarded themselves, but that's something that, Apple and Google have been doing for a really long time as well. But now they've just released this decentralized exchange, which was ahead of schedule. And that's interesting as well, because I like the idea that people are moving towards more decentralized environments. And Binance doesn't need to do that. They're this giant exchange that gets a huge amount of business. People like it. They're providing a great service. And yet they're not looking at, okay, let's just keep doing more of what we're doing to get more money. They're thinking of, okay, what's the future going to look like? Where do we need to be heading?
Mm-hmm.
I think they recognize the risks of government. I think they recognize the risks of other institutional players. They're trying to safeguard that. And if they can get, I see a lot of competing decentralized exchanges out there. There are huge amounts of problems to be solved in terms of liquidity, in terms of speed. There are all kinds of issues when you have something that's decentralized, because centralization gets rid of a lot of that friction. And I think that Binance, because it is so large, it kind of, if they can bring in that liquidity because they already have such a huge consumer base, and if they're encouraging people to use these Binance tokens, even on the centralized side of things, and that helps to create the liquidity as well, that's a really interesting route that I'm going to be watching very closely.
I like too how they've actually taken a big focus on trying to bring a wider array of markets in. I mean, it really said a lot to me when their first fiat exchange was in Uganda, of all places.
Was it really?
Yeah, it was, and it's not a big market. It's still not a big market for Binance by any means, but that was pretty cool. Because they could have easily said, just go to the EU first or something like that, and they have got to the EU now, and they're looking at Argentina, I think, is probably going to be one of the next ones, and I think another 5 fiat jurisdictions are going to roll out this year for Binance. So, yeah, you're right. It's really interesting to see them actually delivering this stuff and just continue to be such an innovator in the space. And I look at so much what's going on in the exchange scene overall, and it's almost always a result of something that Binance is doing or has done. We look at the current IEO boom. That didn't start until Binance kind of started doing it again. And then every exchange within about 6 weeks had announced that they're going to have their own IEO platform and all this stuff. And it all started with Binance.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting how they've just they continue to be this industry leader. And that's a tough thing to do in an industry with so much innovation and so much competition. But we realized then that most of the exchanges, they're just there making money, following the program. And if someone else tells them the program is changing, well, that's what they do.
I think that people unnecessarily look down on successful companies as well. You have something that gets a lot of customers and provides a lot of value that people are using, and they grow really large because a lot of people want to be on that platform. Suddenly you have people start to turn up their noses and say like, oh, it's too big and it's dangerous and it's centralized. And they start to hear this rhetoric, which I completely disagree with. First of all, don't hate something because it's provided value and has grown large. You know, from what I can tell, Binance isn't doing that by creating this direct line of credit with the Federal Reserve, right? Which is what JP Morgan has done, which is what Citibank has. So let's not hate a company for being successful. Furthermore, let's just make a distinction between government enforced monopolies and companies that have just gained a lot of power, right? Because right now we're looking at companies like Facebook that have amassed a lot of power. And people are talking about breaking that up and all of that and how that's all bad. But you also see what's happening with Facebook is their reputation's also going down the toilet. Far fewer people are using it. You know, you look at their earnings reports every quarter that come out and they get worse and worse. Facebook is not doing well and they're self-sabotaging, and, you know, they're not a threat to people the way that people think of it. They think, oh, they're so big and they have too much control. It's like, you can just stop using their product, right? And people do stop using their product and then they lose their market share. You don't need government to come in and break them up. So I think that we need to be really careful to avoid this narrative of thinking that because something's big, it's bad. Big things can also potentially be something in your favor. For example, if your ideas are aligned with something and, you know, for example, if Ron Paul suddenly amasses a huge amount of power, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing if he's the type of person that's going to be like, okay, well, I'm shutting down this government department. I'm going to end the Fed. I'm going to, you know, if someone has your interests, then, you know, them being large isn't necessarily a bad thing. That being said, you know, that's kind of the way politics works, right? And that's a dangerous territory because we're like, well, we'll just get the right president in, we'll give them all this power and then it'll be good. But that's a kind of different type of power. That's government power, which is backed up by the use of force, which is backed up by, you know, putting people in jail with pointing a gun at your head type thing, right? So when you have the government amassing the power, it's a very different situation. And it's not okay to just think, well, when my guy gets in, it'll all be okay because we'll have someone who's going, you know, for my best interests. You don't want someone who can force people to do things to ever amass too much power. But then when you have private companies, I think that's a different situation as long as you don't have the force of government backing them up. You know, if they end up creating a shitty product, they'll probably go downhill unless they're getting subsidized, unless they're getting pushed up by politicians, unless they're getting special favors or handouts. You know, they're probably not going to last if they're not providing good service. So I don't think it's something to necessarily be worried about right now.
It's funny, you just described so much of the economy, all these businesses that shouldn't be competitive anymore, but get subsidies, bribe politicians and all this stuff. Well, that's the great part about the crypto economy right now is that we don't have you know, a too big to fail backed by a government kind of cryptocurrency exchange, right? That would be incredibly problematic. And we take it right back to the start of our conversation, you know, those Wall Street institutions and things like this. I mean, what's going to happen in 10 years when we have, you know, the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ and Fidelity and all these guys, and they start doing paper trading of Bitcoin, right? And they issue out, you know, more products than exist, and then those get called in, and then they go to the government and say, oh, we're too big to fail. We've gambled massively and we lost money again, and we need you to do this. And
that's what we don't want to see. But like talking about this sort of decentralized nature of Binance, one more thing that I do want to mention is what's happening with Japan at the moment. So they've got their G20 Summit, and apparently they've written this I guess you could call it guidance on cryptocurrency that they're issuing to all these countries. And they obviously have the privilege to set a lot of the agenda when they're hosting. And so they've set it looking at cryptocurrency saying, listen, we should all get on the same page with regulation. We should have uniform regulation across the world. And that to me is kind of scary territory, because right now one of the perks of cryptocurrency is that it's across borders. You have this kind of anarchy of different world powers in this balancing act that are competing with each other. And it's in our best interests to let them compete, because then we'll always have an option at the end of the day. If America's terrible, then you can move somewhere else and try and have better laws. But if everyone starts to get on the same page with cryptocurrency and suddenly by some miracle everyone's like, yes, let's all treat this exactly the same way, then it's a little bit dangerous to say the least. We definitely don't want countries being on the same page with cryptocurrency. We want them to compete. As we said, we don't want Malta to just be like, okay, New York, we'll go use your guidelines. We'll treat cryptocurrency the same way you have. So it does worry me that Japan is looking in that direction, and maybe it's because they do see the threat. As long as certain jurisdictions around the world accept this and support this, it can never really be killed. It's this global phenomenon for this global marketplace. So I really do see governments being backed into a corner at the moment with how they're dealing with cryptocurrency and wanting to see how they can then fix this situation.
It's interesting as well because Japan has been quite a positive player in a lot of aspects when it comes to obviously it's the home in so many ways of the Bitcoin markets. I mean, that's one of the biggest markets for Bitcoin outside of the US dollar. And it's interesting, of course, the US dollar doesn't just account for the US, right? It's the international trading instrument for Bitcoin, but the yen's the second biggest market, and that's very Japan specific.
And
right?
for a while, the yen actually was ahead of the US dollar. That was quite incredible when that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've seen Japan kind of trying to go with a route of like, we want to enable the best of the cryptocurrency industry while trying to avoid the worst of it. And it's a really tricky situation again. And I guess we just have to wait and see what Japan actually proposes at the G20, because if they could agree on something like none of us are going to ban cryptocurrency, that would generally be a positive thing, right? But again, that's not what it's going to be. Let's keep it real. It's all going to be about KYC and AML and compliance to regulations and all this stuff. And it starts becoming a bit dirty at that point.
Yeah, and if you start, you were talking before about sanctions and about how the US government is forcing different countries like Japan, say, listen, you have to buy oil from us, or you have to use US dollar, or all of these things. And if you don't, then if you buy from Iran, then you're going to get sanctioned. And these are the types of things that happen with governments bullying each other and saying you have to abide by these rules, or we're going to hurt you economically. And America has a huge amount of leverage with countries all over the world. So I do worry about the potential outcome of them using that leverage to the detriment of cryptocurrency. That being said, I don't see the US government as being this institution. Like, it's not a single entity, right? It's made up of all kinds of different government departments that want to treat cryptocurrency a whole bunch of different ways. There are a bunch of self-interested individuals in all of those departments. Some of them are probably involved in cryptocurrency. We know Ben Lawsky is. He created the Bit license, then that wonderful revolving door of cronyism. He just jumped straight onto the board of Ripple, right? So there are definitely self-interested people out there. And I think as long as you have that sort of balancing act, then maybe not too much damage is going to be created, the same way that we couldn't get the Fed audited, because you had Barney Frank, and you had these people who very much in their self-interest not to have that happen, who are lobbying against audits and that sort of thing. So I think, that being said, like, it just kind of is a testament to the robustness of cryptocurrency, in that it really does play. It's not just about the tech, it's about this kind of game theory as well. And there are all of these individual incentives that come into play that make this robust system. So that makes me really bullish about it, about its longevity, and just always seeing a use case for something that can't be controlled by any single individual.
And it's powerful. It's powerful when you actually start to see it work in real life, when you start to see countries actually, who are supposed to be cut out of the international financial system using this kind of technology, when you see individual players who are using this technology, when you see lifelines opened up to, like, Venezuela, for example. And that's amazing, because the sanctions just keep getting tougher and life just keeps getting harder. And look, let's keep it real. It's not that the entire country of Venezuela, all the citizens have access to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, but there's a niche.
Yeah.
And that niche is powerful. And that niche proves a very interesting point, a point that will only become more salient for more countries as we do see this kind of financial tyranny continue to reign across the globe. Cryptocurrency will be there as this kind of shining beacon of hope for all these people out there.
Yeah, for sure. We can hope and dream, can't we? But I definitely am glad it exists because there's so many more possibilities now than we ever had before. Like I often say, I think this is the biggest step towards freedom we've taken in the last 100 years. I think that this is huge. This is paradigm shifting. No one's talking about it because they don't want to admit it. They don't want to admit the power that decentralized technologies have. But when you have things that don't need people's permission in order to function, because they can function in a decentralized manner all over the globe, that's real power right there. No one's really talking about it. Governments don't want to admit that they don't need to grant permission anymore, that people can do things outside of their jurisdiction. But that's the world that we're moving towards. And I think that the sooner we accept that, the sooner we can figure out a good reaction to that, you know, make better choices than pretending that we still have some semblance of control.
That's it. Someone who I think really understands this is Christine Lagarde, the head of the IMF. And it's so bad because she's working for the bad guys, but I feel like she's this really clever and intelligent lady that actually gets it, you know? But she's like, I get it, but we need to, do
But
something about it.
don't look behind the curtain, guys. Look over here. Yeah.
Anyway, this has been a super, super interesting chat. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about cryptocurrencies. It's always a great time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Always great luck.